Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to Electoral Area Services Committee meeting. It's skakip tanakwel I ata tana skawatsan al stalnup. So we are gathered here today on the territory of the Cowichan people, which is always important to remember. Welcome to everyone. I am sitting in for Lori Yanni DiNardo. Ross Blackwell is going to keep me in order today. The first thing that we need to do is approve the agenda. We've got one new business item, two new business items. So one is new business item 1. Keith Batstone is going to talk to us about development application prioritization. That's a verbal report. And what's the second one? Okay. So could I have a motion to approve the agenda? Mary and Sierra. Okay, thanks. Everyone approve? Okay. Adoption of the minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes? Director Morrison, seconded by Director Salmon. All in favor? Okay. Business arising from the minutes? I don't believe there's anything.
There's no business arising?
Public input period. So this is the chance that we welcome the public to provide input to us on anything that's on the agenda, and you're limited to 3 minutes each.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. I'm Cliff Evans from Shawnigan Lake. Madam Chair, on the agenda today is UB1, Unfinished Business 1. And on Unfinished Business 1 is CVRD Bylaw 4153, Community Parks Advisory Commission Establishment. Bylaw 2017. This bylaw, if it comes to be and passes a third reading today and sent to the board, will be an advisory only bylaw for our parks. This will be taking a lot of power away from our parks commissions, because the existing bylaw that we have now has a letters patent, and it is actually truly a commission. The commission has a budget, they have powers, they can get contractors, they can look after the parks and do all sorts of things. And obviously, staff doesn't really agree with this, and there are some differences. But to take this power away from our parks boards who work for nothing, they look after budgets, and they even take donations and grants, and really bring up the community of the spirit to pass this today to third reading. If it passes, you can be sure it'll go to board right away, and it'll be rubber stamped in board. Madam Chair, I'm asking that this board either pulls this bylaw and shelves it so a proper bylaw can be negotiated, or it is defeated and done away with, period. I think that the new directors haven't had a chance to talk to their parks commissions, nor to the public, and I think the public and the parks commissions should have a real say in this. I know that Sierra, or Director Acton, has approached the Shawnigan Lake Parks Commission, and they did not want to be an advisory committee only. The public hasn't been spoken with to see what their point is on it. I think with new directors, they need to know what they'll be giving away if they vote this third reading in today. Madam Chair, I also believe that the pause button should be passed on R3 and R4 today, because I'm sure that the new directors do not understand this, and to have them vote on it would not be good. Can this not be shelved until the new directors can be brought up to speed and the commissions, parks commissions, and the public can be asked what they want? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Evans.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Madam Chair. My name is John Krug. I've been the chair of the Cobble Hill Parks Commission for 12 years, and I was also alternate director for previous director for 3 years. And I'm speaking to the bylaw. We're very fortunate in the Cowichan Valley to have the park staff that we do have. I think they're the best in BC. They are very, Brian's over there smiling. They're very competent, professional, and they do a lot of good work. Brian and Mike Miller has just guided us through the conversion of the old Mill Bay Church to a museum, and it couldn't have been done without their guidance. It's for Mill Bay, Cowichan Bay, and Mill Bay, Cobble Hill, and Bamberton. In general, the Parks Commissioners are not as accomplished as staff. However, they are the daily users of our community parks and serve as eyes and ears for the community at large, which incidentally pays for all the community parks. And reading through bylaw 4153, there's a couple of things I'd draw your attention to. On page 2, under section J, it states there are 5 electoral areas represented by 7 members, and that math does not work. In the past, there was a member from 2 members from each area. Page 3 at the top under paragraph 3, it should be noted that the chair does not have a vote unless there's a tie, in which case the chair casts a deciding vote. And by the way, in 12 years, I have never seen a tie. In general, there seems to be a number of circumstances whereby a commission member can be terminated. What is not spelled out is the exact procedure whereby the members are selected. A suggestion is that the positions are advertised by the CVRD, and the names and qualifications are then forwarded to the appropriate directors without vetting by staff. And the directors select the commissioner and forward those names to the board for appointment. Obviously, the directors are the ones who have the best knowledge of the applicant's ability to serve. There should be a disconnect between staff and the selection of commissioners, and this would not degrade in any way the good cooperation that has existed between the commissions and the park staff. If this disconnect is not in place, commissions would become extensions of staff rather than representing the community. Therefore, I ask you not to support bylaw 4153 as written. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Krug. Does anyone else like to say anything?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mariah Walliner, and I live in Area E, and I'm also a member of the Satlam Local Area Planning Committee. I'm speaking to you today about items R3 and R4 on your agenda under number 8. And I just want to say that I support the recommendations of staff, heartily support them. I've spent the last about a year and a half meeting with members of what is affectionately referred to as the SLAP committee. And we've done a lot of really great work. And importantly, we've really brought the residents of Area E into this process, especially through a survey that we sent out, which I understand from Bev Suderman had an admirable response rate. And I'm also, some of you may know, I'm also a director with the Satlam Neighborhood Association, and we tried to spread awareness of this initiative, so I hope we helped in part with that. We've also been telling residents about the work of the SLAP committee and the OCP revitalization in our town hall meetings. So the people of Satlam know this is coming down the pipeline. They have participated through surveys and coming to town hall meetings to hear about this, and they're expecting that there's going to be some fruits from our labor. So I would ask you to please support the recommendations. Do not shelve the work that we've done for who knows how long, and negate all the hard work and time that we volunteered to put this material together. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wallner. Anyone else? All righty. Reports. First report up is R1, Ian McDonald. Building inspection.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick introduction, as I don't know all of you, there's some new faces. My name is Ian McDonald, Chief Building Inspector. I'll provide you with a report for the month of October, and I'd like to start off with that we had a very good month. So I've have a little character with an attaboy. We issued 55 permits, which is our best October on record, and we consider the average is 35. The guys have really gone the extra step to get these permits out. There's 459 for the total for the year, and the calendar year would bring us up to 527, and all of last year, which was one of the better years in recent history, was only 505. So we're definitely still seeing a lot of permits coming in. For new housing starts, we had 26 for the month, and that brings us up to 154 now for the year. As how these permits break down, besides the 26, we had 5 permits for renovations, 19 for garage or accessory buildings, 3 for retaining walls or fences, 1 commercial, and we reinstated 1 permit. For our challenges, this goes back to, unfortunately, my highlight where I said, yeah, we're issuing a lot of permits, but as we issue lots of permits, it generates a lot of inspections. So now it becomes a real balancing act with what resources we have. So our guys are really trying to look at efficiencies and ways that we can get all this work done. And it is just an understanding to you all that say that in order to, when we issue all these permits, that when we are on the road a lot, it really gets harder. But I've talked to the guys this morning and said we're about a 2-week turnaround, which is very good right now for permits, because usually I'll get asked that question. So thought I'd get a preemptive strike there. Whoops, something's gone wrong here. So those that haven't seen this graph before, this is a relationship to all the areas, and other than Area B being predominant about 30%, all the other areas are quite equally distributed as far as the way we've been issuing permits. And I'll keep my report very brief and go right to questions.
Thank you. Any questions?
Sure.
Okay.
Thank
All
you.
right, thanks. All right, report number 2, Mike Tippett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and hello to the committee. I'm Mike Tippett, Manager of Community Planning. For those of you who don't know me, or maybe have heard of me but haven't seen me yet, and welcome to the committee. This is an application for a development variance at Woodland Shores Development in Cowichan Lake area, Electoral Area I. The variance is with respect to this subject property here. So this, if you know the Woodland Shores area, I'll try and use the cursor here. Come on. Okay, well, anyway, the main development has been on the south side of that, where the subject property is shown, where you can see the subdivision pattern along the southern shore that's labeled Couch and Lake. This is the northern part of the property that hasn't been developed as of yet, but the owner of the land is moving towards developing it, and discovered in the zoning regulations a problem with respect to the zone that you see at the very top of this map called LR8, which is Lakefront Residential 8. It's a zone that allows low-density, single-family dwelling lots, and the parcel sizes are quite large, more than a couple of hectares. There is a frontage requirement, a lake frontage requirement in that zone that was written as 250 meters, and that's an error. I think it was intended to be perhaps 250 feet. In any case, the variance requested is to eliminate the 250 meter lake frontage requirement and reduce it to 60 meters. 250 meters, just for reference, if you looked at the entire length of that LR8 shoreline in orange on the north arm of Couch and Lake, it amounts to about 700 meters. And given the minimum parcel size in that zone, there is the possibility of creating 10 or 11 lots in there. So it just shows the absurdity of the regulation. 60 meters would allow the land to be developed in accordance with the minimum parcel size. As we normally do for development variance permits, letters were mailed out or otherwise delivered to people within 60 meters of the subject property. A sign was posted, I guess at the very south end of the subject property where the public road ends. To date, as far as I know, we haven't received any public information or comment, although I did have a phone call from somebody who said they had got the notice, which originally had an incorrect map attached. We've corrected that. And she said, oh, okay, I don't have a problem with this, but I'm not going to write anything to that effect to the regional district. And so, that being the case, the recommendation is here, and if you have any questions, I will happily try to answer them.
Director Kuhn? Do we have any questions before we get to that?
Madam Chair, I would note the proponent is here, or the owner behind me, in case anyone has a question of the owner as well.
Okay, I don't see any questions, so Director Kuhn? No, there are no questions, so would you like to say something? Yeah, I'd like to move to option 1. You have a second? Director Morrison seconded. Would you like to read the resolution?
Thank you. So the recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that application number DVP 18I04 by Couch and Lake Holdings on a lot legally described as PID 026953374 be approved, and a minimum parcel frontage requirement in the LR8 zone be reduced from 250 meters to 60 meters.
Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Next board, this will be at the next board meeting, which is November 28th. Okay. Next item is R3, Coralie Breen, who's the senior planner that is heading up the project for the OCPs. So welcome, Coralie.
Good afternoon. Today there's 2 staff reports with respect to the OCP and zoning bylaw harmonization project. And for the purpose of those new directors, we are going to start the presentation today by providing a little bit of context and background information. So please bear with us for a couple of slides. So this presentation will be divided into 3 parts: the background, the context, and analysis, and then the options behind the resolution. The OCP harmonization process will just kind of review the geography, which is the electoral areas. And the context of this review is under the Local Government Act, Part 14, Division 4 for the official community plans, and Division 5 for the zoning bylaws. That's a legislative framework. Just to give some context in terms of the areas that we're looking at in terms of developable land, the shaded blue area, which represents about 4% of the land area within the electoral area, is the main focus of the harmonization. And in terms of the designations, less than 1% is actually in the growth containment boundaries. The harmonization is starting with the 7 electoral area OCPs, official community plans, and the 9 zoning bylaws. And over time, through the harmonization and the modernization process, we hope that we will provide, through extensive consultation over the next year or two, a modernized 1 regional official community plan and 1 regional zoning bylaw. We're on track so far for a harmonized OCP to be reviewed by the Advisory Planning Commission chairs starting in late winter of 2019. We wish it was that easy. Just press a button and they all came together. So what's the policy framework? For the new directors here, is there anyone that's not familiar with the 2050 policy document? Okay, so we'll make sure that you get a copy of that. And as a little bit of a background, I believe this process was under process for most of 2018, 2017, in terms of the development of this regional collaboration framework, which has now been signed by all of the mayors in the municipal governments. And it represents a non-statutory planning framework for the region on growth management and climate change. And it actually recently won a UBC Honorable Mention Award earlier in September. The framework has provided 4 aspirations for the area, for the Cowichan Valley, and several policy directions. And we've used that, the aspirations, to form the vision for the harmonization. And we've also drawn upon the regional directions as a policy framework. And you'll find once the harmonized OCP is presented that these areas have been able to collectively capture all of the policies and objectives in the existing electoral area OCPs. There's been a lot of, through the review, in terms of simplifying and providing one structure and tone and voice, the intent to retain the intent to increase the flexibility, a lot of legal principles that we have adhered to. And there'll be more explanation on this later, but just to give you an idea of some of the types of things that we've addressed in terms of the harmonization or are addressing, is removing policies that fetter future decisions and changing language from will to consider to be consistent with that. We have looked at the internal referencing in terms of consistency within the documents. And the other thing that sort of bubbled up to the surface pretty quickly as we were going through this was looking at what other concurrent processes were happening and how do we ensure that we are harmonizing that existing work, which kind of brings me to the decisions that are at hand today. So many of you will know that electoral areas E, F, and H have been undergoing OCP review processes, and they're at various different stages. it seemed to us that it would be reasonable to consider that information and honor the work that has happened so far in the communities. And so staff did some preliminary review work to ensure that if that content was brought into the harmonization, that the majority of it would in fact be consistent with that harmonization. And so that's part of the process that we have been undergoing. An additional, probably an important point to make, it's part of the harmonization, is that what we are doing, in addition to providing one document with a consistent regional policy framework in terms of making future decisions, it also will save a tremendous amount of staff resources because we'll be reviewing one OCP and one zoning bylaw. And I know Mr. Blackwell has spoken to you a bit about the resource side. So in terms of the decision today, which is should the existing work of electoral area E, F, and H be considered in the harmonization process? What was some of the analysis that staff undertook? We went back to the legislation. What is an official community plan? It is a policy document, as we know, but it is intended to provide a stable framework for land use management and long-term decision-making. And in the context of that, it behooves us to ensure that that document will stand the test of time and that we're making sure that those policies will hold over a longer period of time. What that means is that concurrent OCP processes for the same electoral areas could become operationally problematic, and it is definitely a duplication of effort. So considering the background, the work that's been to date, how best to honor that, the preliminary review of existing content, staff saw three options. There could be others, but three main options in terms of making the consideration or the decision for today. One is that the existing planning work on these electoral area E, F, and H OCPs be considered now. Secondly, that the existing work be paused and considered later as part of the modernization. Or option three is that the existing planning work continue now and they be considered as separate official community plans from the harmonization process. Option one is recommended from staff for the reasons that it best aligns with the objectives of the regional OCP modernization, and it focuses staff resources on completing the harmonization. Option two would delay the incorporation of existing OCP amendments. And for clarity, if option three was selected, that would mean that there would be separate OCPs for electoral areas E, F, and H, and one regional OCP for the other electoral areas A, B, C, D, G, and I. The recommended resolution from staff is Mr. Blackwell? Okay. That the existing draft of official community plans for electoral areas E, F, and H be considered as part of the official community plan harmonization process.
Thank you. Director Acton. Question. Questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is, if we look at the harmonization as maybe a higher level overarching OCP, will the community OCPs ever be dusted off the shelf and considered, or will they still be used concurrently, or do they become obsolete?
Through the chair, the existing OCPs will be repealed and replaced with one OCP. The content in the existing OCPs for Shawnigan, for example, will be included in local plans that will be schedules to the main OCP.
So I think Mr. Blackwell would like to add something.
Thank you. Through you. To be more clear, when Ms. Breen is speaking about these local area plans, we're referring to essentially the those village plans that are currently in place, by and large, for places like Cowichan Bay and Shawnigan Lake. So those fine-grained plans will remain in a different form. They're not being repealed per se. They will just be a modernized and updated local area plan that reflects the specifics of every given community within the region with the overarching umbrella. If you refer to that earlier map slide, you'll see that 96% of the area is kind of a generic and small number of land uses. That's going to be the umbrella OCP.
Director Acton?
So community members who are concerned of losing any kind of community distinction over other communities don't have to be concerned then?
No.
Okay.
Through
I
the
get
chair,
it. I
there's,
get
that content will be retained.
Director Kuhn?
There's quite a large difference, I think, between the different OCPs, especially when it comes to the sizes of the OCPs. I understand Area F's OCP has been recently revised or reworked, and I think they're down to 44 pages or something like this, if I'm quite right. And I understand there's another OCP on the books with 140 pages or something like this, and I just wonder how much of a consolidation can be achieved there if some of the areas either cover larger areas or have maybe the population has different expectations or whatever. Is it possible to streamline that all, or is it, will we still have maybe the base of the OCP being aligned and then have subsections that will still have hundreds of pages or whatever? I'm just wondering, I would like to see it all streamlined in as few pages as possible, because I think some of the regulations in some of the OCPs are just out of this world. So,
Ms. Breen?
Through the chair. We found so far there's an amazing amount of redundancy, and I did have a slide that was taken out that actually identified, I think the number of policies has gone from, so far our count is about 496 to 90, and the objectives less so, there's less of them. So we're seeing that kind of, efficiencies that are being brought into it. There may be policies, for example, that are relative to 4 or 5 different electoral areas, but we're writing it as it applies to the entire region. And in some cases, they will apply to some areas, in some cases, they won't. But that's the kind of streamlining we're seeing. So there's quite a bit of efficiencies happening.
Any more questions? Director Marcotte?
Thank you. I do have a little concern. My APC and my parks commissions, et cetera, have not been active for the last number, I would say probably for almost a year. They haven't had a meeting, and they haven't had a chance to even really go over this material and see how it is going to fit in with their work that they have been doing. So because they haven't been active, and I'm thinking that they probably won't be back reinstated in their positions, I would like to see them have a chance to look at this and get their heads back into to where we are at the state, and give them an opportunity to review some of this. So I know you're anxious to answer, Ross. So that's my concern, is that I don't have an active APC and an active parks, for that matter. So I would like to have a little more time to decide where my community wants to go with this. Thank you.
So clarify for me, I thought that all the areas had someone on your harmonization steering committee. Is that not true?
Thank you. Yes. The harmonization, so there's 2 pieces here, just to be clear. One is harmonization, the other is modernization. Harmonization doesn't reinvent any of the material. So it's the existing OCPs. Nothing changes. There's really nothing to look at on the part of the existing APCs, save and except for them to want to double check to make sure we have not left anything off the table. But there's no change. The modernization is a different beast altogether. Modernization is introducing content that was not contemplated in some or all of the OCPs. Now, the newest OCPs have contemplated some of the newer issues. I wouldn't say that they've necessarily contemplated all of the issues. The modernization process will be a much more robust and involved process where we ground truth some of the emergent issues, and we, through that process, are going to have to figure out a structure that best delivers that. What we have done to date is create we'll call it a steering committee, if you will, that is comprised of the chairs of each APC, including yours. I think there was one meeting. Has it been one or two meetings? Two meetings, okay. One I know for sure that an APC member, one of your APC members attended. But those meetings were rather introductory, and there was no significant discussion around content, et cetera. The expectation is, however, that as the harmonization piece moves forward and we pull together all these OCPs into a coherent and organized structure, that they'll be invited to the table then to dissect those elements. All of the APC chairs that will be in the new APCs to go through that and confirm that everything is as it needs to be through the harmonization process. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you.
Director Salmon?
Thank you. So the local area plans, could you just a bit more detail, like how many will there be and maybe name them? So a bit more.
Through the chair, there'll be a local area plan for every electoral area. So 9 plans attached to the main OCP, and that content will retain, so in Mill Bay, it'll talk about the Mill Bay Village, any of the narrative that's related to that, all of the sub-designations. So the main OCP will have, for example, a main designation that says residential with general policies for residential, and then the local plan will have all of the residential designations that are relative to that local area. There'll be opportunity in the modernization then to flesh that out a little bit more. But the existing sub-designations will be retained, and the existing heritage, et cetera, information will be retained in the local plans.
Follow up. So because I'm not fully aware of the other, so we have a village containment boundary. Is that basically for area A? That would be that, a piece of the existing OCP that would be carried on, but not every area has a village containment boundary now, right?
So the areas that have the containment boundaries they'll be retained. There will be no change to that. The modernization may look at that and determine whether or not there should be some changes in those boundaries, but the boundaries themselves for the harmonization will remain exactly the same, and they'll reside in the local plans.
Thank you.
Director Morrison?
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. So I'm not comfortable with something, and I'm not exactly sure what, and just a couple of thoughts, and I'll get to a question. In our strategic plan, we've got item under 1.3 under responsive official community planning. It's develop a trial format for accelerated review of Area F. And we went to the community stepped up, the OCP steering committee stepped up, and we've I think reached a point where the preliminary community outreach is done. Like, I think we've got a document, go to public hearing, boom, done, it's a completed document. And when we went to the community and showed them the document that was produced, I thought we had pretty supportive buy-in. And the challenge that I'm having is, I've been here 10 years, and now this is looking like, if we proceed, that this will be the second time in my tenure that we've gone to just about and stopped. And I'm getting the sense that, fool them once, shame on you, but fool them twice, shame on me, and this one's on me. Because I thought we'd be done with public hearing and adopting at this point. So, I'm not understanding why we can't let those that are near completion complete and then roll them into the harmonized OCP and modernized OCP process, because given the chance, I want to put that document before my community and see if it passes muster at the public hearing and then adopt it. So I'd love some way that we could do that and proceed forward with this ambitious plan.
Yeah, you go ahead on that one.
Mr. Blackwell.
Thank you, through you to Director Morrison. That's precisely what we're proposing to do in that resolution.
Director Morrison.
I'm not reading it that way. So if you're giving me comfort that that's exactly what we'll do, we'll be at public hearing inside of 6 weeks or so, and that it'll all be considered as part of the new document, then I can support that.
Director Blackwell. Mr. Blackwell.
I want to make a motion.
Without pay, though.
So there are different ways to deal with this issue. One is to take the work that's done in these OCPs up to a vetted draft, a viable draft form, and take it no further and save further staff time with regard to going through the various readings and the public hearing and all the rest. On the assumption that the work that's been done to create a draft has been vetted enough times by the public that you should not expect to see really any more changes. We've also heard that there's less appetite for that. So the other completely viable way is to take all three drafts forward when they're finally done. Yours is done, essentially. G's is done, essentially. E's is soon to be done. H's, I should say, sorry. And adopt those and then move those into the harmonization process. The first way would basically move the content, the first way where we would take it up to a draft would mean that we would harmonize the old OCP, and then move the content of the draft into the modernization work. This way, we harmonize the existing work and move that into the, so it's really, if the truth be known, it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. This way, it takes more staff time. The outcomes would, I can tell you, the outcomes would be identical. However, we're proposing, based on what we've heard, to complete the OCPs, move into harmonization, and then modernize those.
Thank you. Any more questions? All right. Would anyone like to move a recommendation? Director Morrison, thank you. Seconded by Director Acton. Any discussion? Director Acton.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm seconding the motion on the basis that I'm anticipating that this will help when we make land use decisions and look at climate change, and we can infuse that in our decisions, and we can prevent urban sprawl from going further, and that we are making development, the effects of development will be looked at regionally. So that's my complete understanding, and it sounds great, and I support it.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, we'd like to reread the resolution. Mr. Blackwell.
Thank you. The recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that the existing draft official community plans for electoral areas E, F, and H be considered as part of the OCP harmonization process.
All in favor? Opposed? Okay. Carried. R whatever, 4. On the same topic.
We're drilling down a little bit now. And I'd like to,
Point of order, that didn't sound right at all. the resolution that was read out did not sound like completion of work in stream and incorporated into the process. So unless I'm just not understanding language, could I have some clarification on that, please?
Would you like to clarify your?
Thank you. Yes, through you to Director Morrison. So right now they're in draft form. We can't say move these OCPs because they don't exist right now. They only exist in draft form. So to move these things into the harmonization process, they have to be adopted first. So we could be more specific and say the drafts that will ultimately be adopted, but I think the intention is that this reflects the existing condition. These, and in terms of the background part, these will be finished off and then moved into the harmonization process.
Director Morrison.
I would like to see greater clarity in the exercise of the adoption and inclusion before this gets to the board, if that can happen, or is this what's exactly going to be considered by the board at the next meeting?
If I may, what I can do is expand upon this, honoring its spirit and intent, and make an administrative adjustment to it so it's more robust to better reflect what is behind this resolution.
Thank you.
Alrighty. Ms. Breen.
Thank you through the chair. I'd like to introduce Bev Suderman, who is the co-author of this staff report and actually is the senior planner who has been working with the electoral area E community and is intimately familiar with the development of the Satlam plan. What we'd like to do today is present a little bit of the background on this plan, and then the analysis which we undertook in terms of the options that we've presented for you today for consideration and a final recommended resolution. Do you want me to go, or do you want to go? Okay. So Bev's here to step in if I'm not correctly capturing this. So the Cowichan-Coxilla OCP has been under review for 4 years. The review process was directed to include the development of this local plan. It's a particular area of interest. Satlam has experienced significant development pressures. And right now, geographically, it is contained within the area E OCP, although all of it is in area E and part of it is in area F, but the zoning is in both area E and area F zoning bylaws. I'll just let you take a moment to take a look at that. So as you know, the boundaries of areas dealt with in OCPs can be, and they are established by the board. They can be aligned with an electoral area boundaries. They don't have to be. An OCP can deal with part of an electoral area or can deal with parts of 2 or more electoral areas. So the legislation permits that. The important matter here that we're bringing to your attention today is to ensure that there is only one set of policies and map designations that apply to any particular piece in the regional district area. And staff is recommending that this will enable, in tandem with the principles behind the harmonization, more effective planning and decision making. For those reasons, the options set out, and staff's recommending option 1. The first one is that in the process we develop a single set of policies and map designations and zones for the Satlam neighborhood, and we include a portion of the neighborhood in each of the relevant OCPs, local plans, and the one zoning bylaw. duplicating those policies and map designations in each of the current relevant OCPs, which will become local plans. The second option would be to adopt an area plan for the area that meets all the mandatory requirements for an OCP and leave it out of the other OCPs. A third option is to address the area in the OCP for one of electoral areas within which the neighborhood is located. So there are other options, but those were the three that staff considered. Option 1 is recommended, as it is the most consistent with the harmonization process. Option 2 is inconsistent with the harmonization process, as it would create a new local plan. Other electoral areas may wish to do the same, and staff is recommending that this be left to the modernization. And option 3 is the current process and does not address the zoning consistency. The recommendation for today is that the existing draft planning work, including a single set of policies and map designations and zones, be included in electoral areas E and F local plans as the Salem neighborhood plan as part of the harmonization and ultimately moves to the modernization process. You want to add anything, Bev?
Only if there are questions.
Are there any questions? Director Kuhn?
Yeah, that might be a little bit unrelated, but I'm just wondering, this plan has been under review for 4 years. Why would it take that long?
Director Kuhn, if you recall, we got off to a very rocky start. We had the first planner got a new job, the second planner passed away, the third planner is Bev, and we've made good progress since Bev's been on board. And it is a plan that is over 20 years out of date, so it's taking considerable amount of work. Any more questions? I have one, if no one else does. Mr. Blackwell.
Thank you. Just to point out that the recommendation before you is not the same recommendation that's on that slide. There's a couple of words different on there, but the pith and substance is the same, just in case there's some confusion.
So I think I'm sort of understanding this, but it is a little bit confusing to me, because what you would think in a harmonized thing where we're going to have one OCP, we wouldn't be talking about plural OCPs anymore. But what you're talking about actually are the local area plans as being equivalent to the existing OCPs. Is that correct?
Yes, through the chair. This staff report was written not assuming a decision on the previous staff report.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I would just like clarification on the difference between a neighborhood plan and a local area plan.
The local plans in the harmonization will be most of the content that's not in the main OCP, the existing electoral areas in the local plan. The neighborhood, in this particular case, would be a further level down and would be the Salem plan. It would be a subordinate plan within the local plan.
Okay, so then my last question is, if we have been working under the understanding that all of Salem was going to be part of this Couch and Coxsila official community plan, which is now going to be the local area plan, then why do we need to take part of it out and put it into the Honeymoon Bay, what will become the local area plan for the Scotts Falls, Honeymoon Bay area?
Through the chair, it's not required, it's recommended, and the tie-in here is based on zoning, is trying to link the zoning in which currently isn't consistent. So there are many different approaches in terms of how we could do that, but that's one approach.
Is that the most effective or efficient, or?
It's recommended as being the most efficient. given the zoning which is now currently within. So that's the rationale behind it.
Any more questions? Director Morrison moves it, Director Acton seconds it. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Thank you. The next one is UB1. Mr. Farquhar on Community Parks Advisory Commissions. Good area. I know. It's because I'm young.
Good afternoon, committee, to the new members. Brian Farquhar, Manager Parks and Trails. Before you is unfinished business with respect to Parks Commissions. This was a matter that was before the previous committee and the board, and for a couple of reasons, they decided at the time, when we were looking at the bylaws with them, that they wished to have deferred decisions in regards to consideration of the bylaw to the new board. Hence, we're bringing it forward to you now. I know it's your first Electoral Area Services Committee, but as a reminder, the current commission appointments all expire for all commissions, all 9 electoral area commissions, and South Carlton Parks Commission as of December 31st. So it is a bit timely with respect to bringing this forward as unfinished business to the committee. And between myself and Mr. Carruthers, we certainly are receptive to any questions that any of the committee members have. And certainly at this point in time, what is before you is what has been placed before the previous committee and the board. And we look to any direction of the committee at this time. But again, with expiry of the commissions at the end of this year, we are looking for your direction in terms of proceeding forward for appointments of the commissions in the new year. And I'm sure Mr. Carruthers has a few things to add as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Director Morrison.
Thank you. Yes, we did tell you to bring it forward to the next board, and I thank Mr. Carruthers for forwarding the report that a lot of this was part of generating and the likes, but I started to read the report, and there were way too many pages to read this morning when we were doing other things. So my question is, in regards to timing, I believe there's another Electoral Area Services Committee meeting in 2 weeks' time and a board meeting following. Is there any reason why this couldn't be dealt with in those 2 concurrent meetings as opposed to being dealt with today? Because I think I've got some reading that I want to do to refresh myself on some of the recommendations that were in that 2015 report and the bylaw.
Thank you, Alternate Director Bomford. Did you? Oh, okay. I don't. Mr. Blackwell, can you answer that question? Can we postpone this till next EASC meeting? That's fine. That would work. Director Wilkinson.
I think I've been preempted a bit there because I was going to request exactly the same thing for the same reasons, that this is something completely new.
We're looking for a referral motion then.
Yes, please.
You second that one? Sure. Okay. So we're going to refer this back to staff to bring forward at the next EASC? So deferring it. Okay, to the next EASC. Any discussion? Director Smith.
I would just like to ask a question because as a new director, I haven't been involved in this process as to how we got to the number of only 5 for Area G. Is this the appropriate time to ask that question?
That's, I don't know. Do you think we could talk?
Because if we just
Point of order, you got a referral motion on the
Yeah,
floor.
I
It's
get
not
that.
debatable.
We have a,
Madam Chair, if I could, maybe what we can do is, if you're comfortable, pass the referral motion, and then I can speak to the content of this, just to provide a little bit of background, particularly for the newer directors, as to, because this goes back 3 years now, and it might be beneficial to have a little bit of commentary on how we got to that, to put these reports into context for you.
Yes.
I know I need to call the question. I actually had questions about the numbers as well, and it would be nice to have a discussion about that. And if we leave it till next EASC meeting, then there really isn't time to get that fixed. So I'm suggesting that maybe we have a discussion about any issues one has with the content, so that staff could maybe fix it. So on the deferral motion, I would think we need to consider that. If we defer it, then it just comes back as is. So I'll call the question. On the deferral motion, who's approving that? And who's opposing that?
Hang on a second.
Yeah.
Let's get something clear here. I totally misunderstood what you were asking there. I had already thought that we had voted to defer it.
No.
No, we haven't voted to defer it. We need to vote to defer it. What I'm suggesting is there are some people who have questions about the content. If we defer it, then it'll come back exactly as it is. And if you have any ideas that you might want some changes to it when it comes back, then we need to discuss it today. So then we should vote to not defer it, have that discussion, and then vote to defer, refer it back to staff with specific direction. So does everyone understand that?
So we will vote down the deferral now.
So we vote on the deferral. If you want it to come back exactly as it is, then you would say, yes, let's defer it as it is. If you would like to discuss changes to it so that it can come back changed, then you would vote no deferring. We'll have that discussion, and then we'll vote to refer it to staff with direction. Okay? Everyone got it? I've got it. All right, who would like to defer this? And oppose? Okay, it is defeated. So, Director Smith, what would you like to say about numbers?
In Area G, we have a lot of trails and parks, and there are many, many uses within the parks, and they involve also beach accesses, invasive species, tree management, multiple signage, benches, tennis. So a group of 5 members, I just don't feel is adequate for Area G. I think that we could go with a higher number. 10 is a very good number. You'd always have a quorum if you have 10. But also, I think that we have the upcoming CBRD Parks and Trails volunteer policy that is also going to bring into question the amount of people that are the members of the commission. Another thing I'd like to bring up is that on the very end of this bylaw, it's repealing the Saltaire Recreation Commission. One of the things that I think that's really important is Saltaire is changing, our demographics are changing. We have people that are more interested in recreation and that they're requesting more recreation, and I would not like to see the Recreation Commission dropped. Cowichan 2050 under well-being talks about recreation, and so in Saltaire we need to be ahead of the curve and not behind. I think that it's important that the Recreation Commission not be repealed. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Acton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As mentioned earlier from the public, that this has gone to our Parks Commission quite a few times, and just recently also we discussed it casually in September, and I have some written feedback from my members through email. I would agree with Director Smith about the number. Perhaps the wording could be up to. I don't feel like the number is adequate for Area B. But I also feel like the members of the current Parks Board actually agree that they are an advisory, and that's what they feel like their role is, for advising and planning, and they don't actually want to take over managing the parks in any way. They do want to have more staff interaction, like more more of a feedback loop, and I would like that written in there about how many times staff comes and supports the commission on a yearly basis, like perhaps 3 or 4 times a year, but I would actually like a firm commitment on that. And I like the idea that there's no elections. I think that it's a lot to ask of volunteers to have an election, and it also can create an environment that is no longer an advisory board for the director, and it kind of defeats the purpose of being an advisory board. Those are just a few of a few things that I'd like to see come back.
Thank you, Director Kuhn.
I think Director Smith's question brings back one of the original problems that we had with this whole redoing of the Parks Commissions. I think she's under the impression that that the Parks Commission members help maintain the parks or do some work. And I think the aim of the CVRD staff is to minimize this. And I think that's where some of the problem arises. And I think we should have a discussion about that as to where do we see the purpose for our Parks Commission. We've been through this partially, but we've got new board members now that haven't been involved in that process. And I think it would be a good exercise to go through that, because we'll have to face that, because some of our Parks Commissions are more involved than others. In my area, they're not that involved. They're involved in what should be done, but they don't do any work themselves that much. But there are other commissions that are very much involved, and I appreciate that. And I think, quite frankly, I like to have the community members involved, even though, yes, there's liability issues and there's all kinds of complications and should be done by staff and all this. But, I mean, the Parks Commissions and the APCs are the area directors' only direct connection to the public, apart from being at, let's say, town hall meetings or whatever. And I think for a director, it is very important to have a well-functioning Parks Commission, a well-functioning APC, and if they are to be well-functioning, they have to have some kind of power. If we take all the power away, then in essence what you get is the people who say, well, hell, why should we do it? If we don't have any input anyway, and if staff are going to dictate to us what we can do, then might as well forget it. The fun is gone. I mean, we know that from all of us here. I mean, why am I involved in this here? I enjoy it because I have the impression I can steer something. I can have an influence on something. If commission members get the impression that they're not really involved that much anymore, because no matter what they say, staff is going to tell them what to do anyway. You'll get disinterested people, and then what you have in the end is you have bureaucracy taking over, and the population is left out in the cold, and I just don't like that idea. So I'd like to see this discussion come back to this circle, and let's hack it out.
Mr. Crothers?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So there's been a number of comments made. If you want to continue some more questions, then I can attempt, because there's a number of these that I can attempt to answer for you, and because this has been some time since we've dealt with this issue. So if there's another if you want to finish off, or if you'd like me to.
I've got a few more questions. Should we do that first, or? Okay, Director Wilkinson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Evans and Mr. Krug and others have effectively voiced a lot of the concerns which I share. But one point which comes back over and over again by just about everybody is the almost complete elimination of the present powers and responsibilities of the commissions that I have here. This is a copy of the original bylaw for Area C, 1009, and it gives 2 pages of responsibilities, of powers, and that's going to be taken away. That's taken away the people that I represent, who actually do have a lot of volunteer work going on. They're the ones that built the bike park. They're the ones that built the dog park out of their own time and efforts. And that's the kind of involvement that I want to see continue. And as Klaus has said, as Director Kuna said, take away the powers and responsibilities, you won't be left with anything. The volunteers who are on our parks commissions are our eyes and ears. They are not only volunteers, they're users. They go round and they see things. They report back through the commissions and through me, through emails, through phone calls or whatever. I can then bring that back. With all due respect, the CVRD staff cannot have that kind of vision. Practical vision on the ground, boots on the ground, as somebody else mentioned here just now. And I agree totally with what Director Smith has said about the numbers on the commissions. Let's change it up to a number. Let's not set an arbitrary number. So basically what I'm saying is there are a lot of questions here, a lot more to discuss. And I'm hoping, obviously, that everything that we're saying here is going to be brought back for discussion and amendment to this bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Bomford, alternate Director Bomford.
And I'll be repeating some of the comments. First of all, I also would like to refer to Mr. Evans and Krug, I think, their comments. I talked to the chair of our Parks Commission in Cowichan Bay. She raised the very same points. And I think I read the staff report, and I understand, coming from the staff, it's a lot of work on behalf of the staff. We've got a lot of committee members, and maybe our bylaws are outdated when it comes to the activities of our committees. But the thing that, reading through the bylaw that's proposed here today and reading through the staff report, that comes through so clearly is that this very much reads as a bureaucratic report. This is easier for the bureaucrats, and don't get me wrong, it's not a criticism of, I understand the workload that they have to do, and I'm wondering if there isn't a better way of looking at this, because these committees in our community are really important. Just as Director Wilson has said, we're talking about community here. This has got everything. This is what directors really, really rely on, is what they're getting back from their communities. You take that away, you have one of the other comments that the chair of our Parks Committee brought out is, setting up the South Cowichan Community Parks Advisory Commission, with 7 members from all areas to the south of the Cowichan River. If that's going to be looked at, I'm going aside a bit here, but if that's going to be looked at, she strongly, if that's what gets supported, she strongly suggests that there needs to be further wording in there so that there is, at a minimum, 1 member chosen from each area, because otherwise you could get 7 members chosen and 5 of them are representing Cobble Hill, say. You don't have a voice. But I really feel strongly that this is not the way to go about this. You're losing such an incredible community asset by having these people. And it is said in the report that those who volunteer on the committees now can continue to volunteer in their community. There's not the same buy-in if they're not having the structure of a meeting and just feeling a little more of that connection to the board. It puts a lot of onus on one member from one community to try and keep that whole, the feedback to the director, but also, you know, the feedback to the community. I think that this is not the way to go, that you're really losing what's important, and it's all about community. And I don't want to take away from the issue that the park staff is bringing forward. I think that we could be looking at other ways to address this. Thanks.
Mr. Crothers.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So let me start by saying I appreciate the sensitivity around this. I mean, I'm acutely aware of the role that the commissions play, not only the Parks Commissions, the Recreation Commissions, the APCs. They are the link between the community and the directors and the community and the organization. You know, when I started here in 2014 and I did an audit of our operations and where some of our challenges were in terms of best practice, in terms of how we're doing business. And one of the things that came out loud and clear was our use of commissions. And we have not kept up with the times. These commission bylaws that you have, many of them, your Parks Commission bylaws, date back to the 80s. They date back to a period in time when regional districts, and not just this regional district, you know, in my previous 10 years, I've dealt with exactly the same issues. These bylaws date back to a time when regional districts had very few staff. The services that were provided out in the rural areas were provided by commissions. They were provided by community groups because the regional district didn't have the capacity to go out and develop parks and to do that sort of thing. And what's happened over time is the regional districts have evolved. Our park system has evolved from a number of small community parks to a park system. We have professional staff. We have, you know, reasonable budgets, park planning. I mean, we have a very sophisticated park system. We are not in an era where our volunteers, and if you read through the bylaws, and I get the concerns that some directors are raising about taking powers away from the commissions, those powers have been taken away already. We don't have commissions hiring staff. We don't have commissions with budgets. We don't have commissions spending money. Commissions are advisory. That is, so these bylaws have been drafted to reflect the current practice. Because what we had was a huge disconnect between what was happening on the ground today and what the bylaws reflected from 1980 or 1990. All of our commissions in this regional district are advisory. The previous Economic Development Commission, the Environment Commission, the APCs, all of your commissions are advisory. The decision making is at the board amongst elected officials, you folks that were elected. Your link to the community is through commissions who are appointed to provide a community perspective to the board of directors when they're approving budgets, when they're making decisions around policy, when they're making decisions around capital investment, park acquisition, those sorts of things. So as much as I hear the concern that this is taking powers away from the commissions, those powers have been gone for a long time. We operate in an environment where we have a very sophisticated park system and a park service where our staff and their contractors deliver a lion's share of the service. This is about streamlining the role so that there's no inconsistency in the regional district. We have 9 different parks commissions, and they all have different bylaws, and they have different terms, and they have different membership numbers. Very hard in a large organization like ours to manage 9 different commissions. For the same reason you're having a discussion about your OCPs. You have 9 different OCPs. We're trying to harmonize them. We're trying to modernize them. That's exactly what the intent of this exercise was with the Parks Commissions. It was never intended to take away the value of the commissions, never intended to take away the ability for them to volunteer in their parks and to go out and raise funds and to do that kind of thing. What it does do is it reflects the current practice. And so, you know, I have to acknowledge that it was never staff's intent you know, to gut these commissions. In fact, when I look at the responsibilities, we've actually, you know, tried to be very specific about what it is, and it's fairly broad as to what the responsibilities and the roles of the commission members would be. And I think in today's time of diminishing volunteers in our communities, most volunteers don't want to take on all of that extra work. They want to come, they want to provide their advice. In some parks, they want to volunteer. We have a volunteer policy that's pending that will provide some guidance and guidelines around how we utilize volunteers in our parks, and I don't see that changing. So I really needed to be clear on what the intent was. I heard the words used, power, taking away power, but the ability for these commissions to influence. That's exactly what they do. They're there to reflect the community's desires and to influence either the area director or the committee or the board in terms of decisions that are made on the ground. That they are influential, and that's their role. So in terms of the numbers, we looked at it in terms of population. That was the criteria that we used. We had 7 members, I believe, identified for the south end, much higher population electoral areas. And for the smaller electoral areas, we had a smaller number. Staff are not wedded to those numbers. If the committee felt that there needed to be better representation, absolutely, by all means. This was just it was an attempt to try and be a little bit more consistent. And I can't stress enough that when you have an organization as sophisticated and the size of the Cowichan Valley Regional District, consistency is important, because we spend a lot of time spinning our wheels when we have 9 different ways of doing things around the entire regional district. So that's my preamble. That's the bit of the history as to why this is in front of you. There's a number of other commissions that need to be looked at as well. I think the committee at the time felt that it was important to deal with the parks commissions because they are the most active, probably the most prolific commissions in the community. And so this is in front of you to consider a more consistent approach to managing a very valuable resource in our community, your parks volunteers.
Director Wilkinson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The CIO he's totally correct in that a lot of these, the older ones, go back to 1979, actually, by letters patent. But they were amended. This particular one was amended in 1994, 2007, and in 2014. They've not been left as they were originally. They have been changed and amended as they were required. I agree that the commissions are advisory. And I'll say it again, as I said just now, without that advisory capacity, without those eyes on the ground, I am left unaware of what people are thinking. And that's not right. I have to take issue with what the CAO said about diminishing volunteers. That's not true. Not in my community, anyway. Thank you.
So I want to clarify something with you, Director Wilkinson. So these commissions are still going to exist. They're just going to be they're going to be existing under one bylaw. How are they going to be? I don't understand. Pardon me? In terms of numbers. Well, okay, we got some issues with the actual how they're written, but the premise here is that we will continue with parks commissions as an advisory commission, which they are now. So this is supposed to reflect how it's operating now. And now I think the outstanding question I've heard is the numbers that we will have on those commissions. So would anyone like to provide, what would you? Hang on. I think do we need a motion, or do we can just provide some direction to staff?
Madam Chair, you're at a committee level. I mean, we're prepared to have some discussion and see where the committee's coming from. You may want to make some recommendations in the form of a motion that can be passed, and then staff can take that away and amend the draft bylaw to come back to the commission if it gets deferred back.
Okay, so just give me a second here, because I've heard a number of things. One, most importantly, is the numbers on the commissions. And I would say for my area, when I have actually 4 significant neighborhoods, that 7 doesn't work. I need to have at least 8 people so I can draw from across the area. So I would be supportive of some sort of a up to 10 thing. I'm wondering about the South Cowichan Community Parks Advisory Commissions, whether we need to have a little bit more discussion with the people that are involved in that and how that should be constructed. Sounds like that there's a bit of an issue there, potentially. and I'm wondering about the comment on staff support for the commissions. So currently, my understanding is they come once a year during budget time to explain the budget.
Can
Mr. Farquhar.
Well, and before, you can stay there, Brian. I guess before Brian deals with those details, I would suggest that this is a bylaw for the commissions. This isn't a bylaw for your staff. Embedding how many times a staff member will come to visit a commission, I don't think is appropriate to put into a commission bylaw. This commission bylaw governs the conduct and activities of the commission, not of the staff. And I think that might be problematic, embedding that kind of requirement into the bylaw itself, because there's other factors that determine staff's availability, budgets, other factors. And as I'll be honest with you, as your administrator, I wouldn't want to be bound. It would be very difficult to be bound by a commission bylaw that dictates staff's activity. But maybe Brian wanted to add to.
Right, so we don't necessarily have to embed it, but it would be interesting to understand what staff feel they can commit for.
Yeah. Madam Chair, certainly with respect to the annual review of draft budgets, we endeavor to meet with all the commissions. However, depending on the level of matters or issues that are going on in any particular electoral area, could be a Parks and Trails master planning initiative like we recently did and completed in Electoral Area E. Staff attendance to commissions throughout the year varies. There might be very little going on in a particular electoral area with respect to parks, so we might only see that commission for a budget meeting. In other cases, we might be out to see those commissions, whether it be through commission meetings or in-field meetings or workshops 2, 3, 4 times over the year, 5 times over the year. It all depends on the level of complexity of the matters or issues being addressed in the community and to what degree there's interaction and input required with the commissions throughout the year. So it varies year over year.
Right, so my feeling is that we have these commissions and they're really engaged volunteers, and we should be thinking creatively about how we can engage them more with what the staff work plan and I know my commission, for example, I know Frank, the chair, is always down here talking about the student work crews and so forth. So I'm sure that we could be using our commissions a lot more if we put our heads to that and making them feel more connected with the work that goes on.
If I may, Madam Chair, certainly we can. However, that comes at a cost, and that comes at a cost in terms of what your staff are working on and otherwise in terms of the small Parks and Trails division that we have. So certainly we can be more engaging with commissions in terms of meeting with them more. However, there is that takeaway then from other projects, activities, issues that staff are dealing with. So it's always trying to find that balance each year in terms of staff availability to meet with commissions, dealing with projects or issues, and otherwise dealing with the day-to-day that staff are dealing with. So certainly we can endeavor to look at that and bring more information back to the committee for consideration.
So certainly with our volunteer coordinator, that's another opportunity.
There certainly will be that opportunity.
And if we don't look at it as an additional workload, but potentially a chance to decrease your workload, it might work out.
Madam Chair, if I can offer there's 2 different things being discussed here. One is the Parks Commission bylaw, which is your governance framework for your Parks Commissions. The other is a work plan issue. The other is a work plan issue and a budget issue. And that needs to be decided by this group as to where they want the resources for the park services expended. As Brian says, it's a balance, but we can do much more engagement on a number of fronts. It comes with a cost. Engagement takes time, and so we're prepared to address that. What I can tell you is that I had the opportunity to sit in, and I try to get in once in a while to the various departments and division staff meetings, and had the pleasure of sitting in on one of Brian's division staff meetings. And one of the agenda items on their division staff meetings is commissions. And Dan and Ryan and the staff that are engaging with the commissions report out to the entire Parks Division as to what the issues are in any given commission, what they're doing to deal with them, the response to questions that have come up or requests for stuff that never ever even hits this board table that I saw proactively as being dealt with on a regular basis by our park staff. So I think they do a pretty good job of balancing their numerous demands and attempting to engage with our commissions and keep them supported and providing questions or answers to their questions and resources when they need them. Can we do better? potentially, but that becomes a work plan issue and a budget issue, I think, moving forward. The chairperson is correct. The volunteer coordinator is certainly going to help that in many respects. That was the intent behind that position, was to provide more capacity to be able to support our volunteers, and that would be the intent. We had hoped to have that position in place by now. Unfortunately, some HR limitations have prevented that from happening, but we would expect that early in the new year.
So there's one more thing that I heard, and I'll go back to more questions, was the Saltaire Recreation Commission. And so can you clarify for me whether we're going to be moving forward or picking up where we left off from the last term, the recreation issue, if that's going to be pursued again?
Yeah, so Madam Chair, a little bit of a different issue, but I think it would be worthy of having a conversation with Director Smith about the Recreation Commission for Saltaire, because I believe the reason that it was recommended for repeal was because all of the other commissions are parks and recreation commissions, and I think there was probably a feeling that maybe that wasn't necessary. If Director Smith has some concerns with that, we should certainly discuss that, because my understanding is that the Saltaire Recreation Commission plays a different role than the Parks Commission. They're separate entities, if my understanding is correct. And we have a recreation center, a community center in Saltaire that the commission has some involvement with. So we're certainly interested to talk with the director, and if we need to modify that to retain that Recreation Commission, that's at the will of this committee, not of staff.
Director Salmon?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So thank you, CAO, that helped, especially as a new director, to hear that. That's funny, because I was thinking, well, they already are advisory, so I don't know what would change, but you've explained it. But a couple of specifics on the bylaws, the bylaw. One, the members thing that I agree with Director Smith, but I think if we just, some wording that was up to 9 members or up to, I think the up to is important, because we may not always have the full amount. We may only have 5 at particular moment. So that's numbers, but also the stipulation, the restriction there about up to so many members who reside in the electoral area. I think we should consider just dropping the residency restriction because of the arbitrary way the boundaries are between B and E, and lots of anomalies. And in fact, the area directors can live outside, and do sometimes live outside their electoral areas. So if we drop that, I think it would just give the flexibility. I know in Area A right now, one of our longtime members have moved out just across the line into Cobble Hill, and I wouldn't want to have to say, sorry, you can't be on the commission anymore. Thank you.
If I can respond to that, Madam Chair, I think probably maybe one of the issues there reflects back to some of the old practices around elections and people running for those positions. But I think with the framework that we've got laid out, it's ultimately up to the board to appoint those members. From an administrative perspective, I don't see a problem with removing the residency requirements from the bylaw.
Director Smith.
I was pleased to hear what you had to say, Brian, regarding the Saltaire Recreation Commission. I think it needs to be taken out of this document so that we can have a further discussion. I don't see the Shawnigan Lake Community Center or the Carey Park Recreation Center being included in this discussion. So I think it's very important that the Saltaire Recreation Commission and Saltaire Recreation function move to a different time. Thank you.
Director Sam, did you, Director Acton?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to agree with the points that Director Salmon made on some of those changes, so I would welcome those. I would also suggest perhaps we could even have the numbers be up to 15. That's what we have on our APC. Well, at least in Area B, that's what we have on our APC. You don't necessarily use that many. Could be up to the director to decide how many they want to appoint. And if suddenly there's a mad rush of people who you can, and if you can actually find 15 people who still want to be on it, might have a year where you're, like for us, when we start doing a master plan for Old Baldy and really develop that with cable cars and everything. That's just to stress some people out. Then we might want 15 people on our commission, so I'd like to suggest that number.
Thank you, Director Bonford.
Just a little further on the wording to be considered with the South Cowichan Community Parks Advisory Commission. It says is established consisting of 7 members who reside in the following geographical areas. Can there be further wording to that there will be 1 member from each geographical area chosen so that you don't end up with, you know, there's always the politics and shenanigans involved with selecting as the chair of our committee stated it. Thank you.
Director Wilson, I've got your name wrong all afternoon. I've had your name wrong.
That's okay.
I apologize.
I've been called worse. On the subject of staff time and costs, I can understand that this is a major factor. One of the things that I heard over the last few months was that the APCs, well, the commissions, the meetings are held whenever there was a need. And there used to be a time when they would have informal but regular meetings. The director could say, look, how about meeting? That's one of the things that I'm going to talk to my commissions about. We should and probably will reinstate regular meetings. And this is a way that I can be kept fully in touch. And I can then, all right, it's informal, I can make notes, but I can bring those notes back to the staff here at any time. It's only a 15-minute drive. Come down and talk to them and say, this is what we found so far. That hopefully would keep the cost down.
If I can just make a comment, so we're delving into the APCs. I would caution directors that the APCs are established for a very specific purpose. APCs are not intended to be a sounding board for your community-wide initiatives. And that's why they often they meet when required, because they have a very specific purpose. They have a very specific purpose to review applications that are referred to them. And that's the scope of their responsibility. The scope of their responsibility is not to talk about other factors in the community. And it's under legislation. You have a little bit more latitude with your parks commissions. However, the scope of your commission is to discuss parks issues. I'll go off a little bit and talk a little bit about a proposal that was put forward to the previous board and that will be coming forward to this board, was the concept of sub-regional services committees, where the elected officials from the 4 geographic areas of the regional district, the south, the core, the west, and the north, would establish some committees and with the endorsement of the chair and obviously and the board, to be able to meet and talk about some of these kinds of issues. And there could be a potential link to what you do with your parks commissions and what we could do in the future with a sub-regional services committee kind of model if the board chose to go in that direction. So there are some potential linkages there as well. But I just wanted to caution particularly the new directors about the use of the APCs, because it is very specific as to what APCs roles are.
Yeah, hopefully you'll understand that I'm on a learning curve here, and I appreciate your comments. I think perhaps I worded that badly. It wasn't to say that, look, I'm going to do this and talk about anything with the APCs. But I fully appreciate what you're saying there, Brian. Thank you.
Director Kuhn?
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Carruthers that the APC has a definite purpose, a very narrow purpose. In reality, I don't know how it is with many of the other directors. In reality, though, with my APC, it's quite different. We haven't met that often because we didn't have any reason to meet. But when we meet, a specific topic is discussed, and let's say if the applicant comes and gets listened to, questions asked, and then afterwards they ask me all kinds of questions, and I think it is fair, and I think that's not an official purpose for the APC, but it's a good connection for the area director, because let's face it, the members of the APC, these are motivated people. They want to be involved. So, and because of their, let's say, desire to be involved, they have a fair amount of knowledge about the whole community. So it's a beautiful opportunity for the area director to discuss with them after the meeting is over. But that is part of the purpose. It doesn't get officially mentioned, but I certainly enjoy that, and I enjoy the contact and the connection with them. And I think it's very valuable, and I think that even though it's unofficial and but it's a valuable tool for me.
So before I go to Director Morrison, Mr. Blackwell, do you have something to add about APCs?
Thank you, yes. Just to follow up on what Mr. Carruthers saying, how APCs are structured and so forth, as he said, is set out in the Local Government Act. There's no deviation from that. There's the complementary APC bylaw that also sets out certain obligations, and it can be a little bit confusing and so forth, but there is a legal responsibility with how those meetings are conducted. And so for those area directors that are new, please feel free to contact me, pop into my office, etc., and I'd be happy to walk you through kind of the legal mechanics of how APCs are established and how they're supposed to run and your relationship with them, just to kind of keep us out of the glue because we didn't necessarily understand all of the obligations associated with them.
Director Morrison.
Thank you. And just further to that, what Mr. Carruthers and Mr. Blackwell have said is very true. And yes, the interaction between directors and APC and parks are really important. But I just want to remind everyone, this is like our first EASC meeting of the term. And there's a whole bunch of process and reporting and minutes and all of those things that are incredibly important that have to be rolled out and laid out so that we are sticking to a lot of what we heard earlier this morning around proper process and that we're not, as Mr. Blackwell said, getting into the glue. So I just think it's really important. We've got some more orientation opportunities and the likes, and for opportunities for us to learn proper process. And I don't want us to get too far removed from, we've got the bylaw here. Are we going to proceed with it? Do we want staff to come back with changes? And we'll consider this again. I'll repeat that I didn't get a chance to reread the 38 pages of the report that was sent around this morning, and I really want to have an opportunity to look at that and understand the rationale from 3 years ago before we get into full-on discussion of the of this when it comes back. Thank you.
Okay, we've had quite a discussion. Anything more? So Mr. Carruthers is going to recap, and I don't know, we're going to turn this into a motion or?
I think we can take it as advice
direction?
from the committee,
Okay.
direction from the committee. So what I heard, and please staff chime in or others, that we revisit the membership and that the membership be up to. Somebody had been recommending, our corporate officer is having.
I was just going to say, Madam Chair, make sure it's an odd number because you have to figure out your quorum. Don't use 10. Make it 9, make it 11. I heard a suggestion of 15 because you need to have an odd number for the quorum to represent a majority.
Thank you, Mr. Berry. So what I would suggest, we'll take that under advisement and we will come back to the committee and report out on any implications of that. Odd numbers being one of them. When you're talking about quorum, having it up to leaves it open, so we're going to have to structure then what becomes a quorum if you don't have a defined number of people. And so there's unintended consequences of some of these changes so that we need to sort out. But we'll come back and reply to that recommendation. Request to eliminate the residency requirements. So that's something that we'll address. To remove the repeal of the Saltaire Recreation Commission from the bylaw. That South Cowichan Joint Parks Commission have one member from each geographic area is what we heard, and we'll address that. Those are the 4 key items that I had that were addressed.
So is everyone
Mr. Berry has
And Madam Chair, we'll come back as well with a couple of little housekeeping items. For example, the citation, we're not going to come back with a citation of 2017. This bylaw will be 2018, maybe 2019. Also, Section 4A, it says in the year 2018, appointments will be for 1 year. It's not going to happen. So we'll make that a 2019, just to get it out there that there will be some of those little year changes, just because this process has taken so long.
Okey doke, everyone okay with that? Director Acton?
This was mentioned to me, I think, by Mr. Blackwell, that there was the idea of having some appointments for a year or some appointments for 2 years, so where you could decide if somebody didn't want to commit for 2 years, and then also so that your Parks Commission doesn't suddenly end all at the same time. We could add that in there.
Staggered terms.
Yeah, staggered terms. It's in there?
Yeah, it
Okay.
is. I thought it was too. Amy,
Okay, so
we'll make sure it's,
So we don't
that we
need,
don't get rid of it.
we don't need a motion or anything here?
No, we'll take that under
Okay.
advisement.
Under advisement, so let's move on.
Sorry, did it need to be deferred to the formal resolution to defer it now?
Apparently not.
Oh, deferral, please. Mr. Blackwell.
So it's actually referred back to staff to make changes and come back next EASC? Okay? Do I have to write that out and send it to you? Okay, maybe Director Acton would do that.
A motion to refer to our next electoral area services, refer back to staff and bring back to our next electoral area services.
Do I have a seconder? Thank you. All in favor? All right. Unfinished business 1. Oh no, that was what we just did. New business 1, Keith Batstone, development application prioritization.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, committee members. All this talk about commission, sorry. In particular to the newest members of the board and our alternate director, Bomford, today. I apologize that I don't have a fancy graphic to show you or anything to heap on you. I haven't even so much as provided you a written report. So you're welcome. The reason I'm here today is to present for your information and prompt any discussion, we'll see how that goes, with regards to existing procedures for the processing of development permit applications. I think it's fair to say that this entire meeting has basically fallen under the theme that we might entitle Delivering Government Services in a Time of Change with Finite Resources. We've heard a lot of themes on all of our reports today, and I'm going to further reinforce them with a very practical observation about the difficulties of, again, providing government services in a time when we have the same amount of resources. I'll just highlight the issue as it stands, and then we'll dive into what I, again, hope prompts some discussion. As we know, the Cowichan is changing. Development trends are changing. Demographic changes are before us. We've been experiencing them for 10, 15 plus years. And yet the human and organizational resources at the CVRD have not changed terribly, except for some really key areas. For example, the harmonization, modernization, which has been ably resourced with human resources staff, and it follows the commitment of the board. That good work has been following the commitment of the board to modernize our OCPs, and that's, of course, as you know, from having read your strategic plan of the outgoing board, the strategic plan 2014-2018. Some of the priorities include sound fiscal management, all the other usual suspects, responsive official community planning, and excellence in regional planning. I think this issue falls very much under that. We are trying to, in development services, and again, I'm sorry, I didn't, for those who don't know, my role as a planning coordinator in the Development Services Department. More information about the structure of the Land Use Services Department, where Development Services fits in, is located in this book. But to cut to the chase, Development Services currently has 135 or thereabouts applications in 4 planners' hands. We also have recently received a number of big files. We have 35 incoming applications that have not been assigned to a planner simply because we don't have the staff to do it. They have 135 other permits that they're working on. So what do? We have been, the practice of late is to inform applicants when they come through the door that their applicants will not be looked at for a minimum 6 to 8 weeks. And in fact, we have been much closer to the 8-week limit. It gives us no pleasure to deliver that message to applicants, but we simply cannot dedicate staff time to all the checks and balances that you're increasingly becoming familiar with, and the involvement of APCs, referrals to other agencies, and bringing the board, the applications to ESC and the board and beyond. So this has resulted in an unfortunate backlog and a lot of unhappy faces on the applicants' ends, and I completely empathize with it. In lieu of dedicating more staff time and arguably running contrary to our commitment for sound fiscal management, Development Services is contemplating a triage and prioritization process for these 35 applicants that are currently in queue. And for your awareness, we would like to work through it and report back to you. But in general terms, we are looking at moving forward applications instead of on a first come, first serve, first person in line gets the next service. We're looking at a prioritization process that would emphasize the need to more timely expedite applicants that involve community-wide or regionally wide matters of significance, as opposed to fence height variation permits. We think, it's in the public of interest to move take a prioritization approach to moving these bigger applications, which, if I'm to be honest, the risk of their failure is a risk to the entire community, as opposed to a fence height application for a single property owner who only benefits on their site. They're all valid applications, and as Mr. Blackwell will point out, the legislation requires us to consider them all, but knowing our organizational constraints, we intend to move forward with a prioritization process, see how it works, see what we could do better, but ultimately get all these applications through the system in the most, we feel, equitable manner given the context. I have nothing further to add other than I think that I briefly touched on it before. I think this initiative aligns fairly strongly with at least 3 portions of the strategic plan. Again, our values, our regional strategic focus in 2 areas regarding planning, and our electoral area focus. I would add, it will allow us to respond better to bylaws compliance issues in a proactive manner. But I will. Back to you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Blackwell.
Thank you, through you. So just to put an exclamation mark on Mr. Badstone's comments, he's been kind of gentle with the information. The fact of the matter is, I'll be more blunt, we're in a crisis situation. We're getting in more applications by far than we can ever take care of. That has real and significant economic implications for builders and developers in this community that contribute a lot to our employment base, et cetera. We've done all we can to find efficiencies. We've closed down the front desk. We've done everything we can possibly imagine, and we cannot keep up. And staff, I would say, are burning out. That's the reality of the situation we're in. So the kind of the Hail Mary pass on this, and I will grant you it's an ugly thing to contemplate, is we have to artificially select those that get through the gate first and those that don't. And as Mr. Badstone said, the position we're recommending is that we look at those that have a more significant consequence, and we give priority to those. We expect blowback on that. Can't avoid it, but we can't continue on the same plane that we're on right now. So we're bringing this to you for your consideration. If you feel that this is something that you want to support, then I would ask for a resolution to direct staff to develop a kind of a bifurcated process where we we have those, those applications that need to receive priority. We'll, at a staff level, we'll figure out the most equitable way to do that. But what we need is formal direction to change our process.
Director Acton?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Batstone, I completely support your request to kind of manage it in a more proactive way. But also, would you be considering a bit of a screening right at the beginning where, because I've had feedback where people have given their application in and they say, they hear, oh, it's going to be 8 weeks, and then at 8 weeks they go, oops, you don't have this. Whereas at the front desk they say, well, let's just submit it how it is. We'll look at it in 8 weeks, and then they get that call in 8 weeks and get the so sorry, you don't have it all, and they could have had that time to get it all in. So could there be also that consideration of allowing people to have the time to get ready, and then also rewarding those who are ready as well?
That's a really good point. We can certainly try to weave that in. We have been trying to identify those applications that just don't have enough content for a planner to pick up and make it start moving on it. It largely goes back to staffing resources right now, but and just for your awareness, again, I held up that booklet. You'll see a number of faces associated with development services. We're actually down to 4.5 people, if you can believe we can have half a person, but out of 6 normally. So we're down by 1.5 staff people, and it's a mixture of casuals and part-time staff. So as we staff up, we certainly will have a point person to go through those applications. I'll leave it at that for now.
Director Marcotte?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to move the suggestion that was made by our employee here and move forward with that and at least put that forward to see how we can make it work better. So I would like to move that.
A seconder? Second? Director Morrison?
I was seconding, and I must take my leave, so could we call for a vote?
I actually have a question about unintended consequences. So if we put if we're putting the majority of our resources to the big files, which maybe are economically important to the region or maybe not, so that's sort of some sort of criteria around that seems to me would be helpful to look at. But the unintended consequences of people who won't be getting their things in a timely fashion, are we going to see a whole bunch of building going on and people behind the trees that then we'll have enforcement issues to deal with?
Thank you. So building is a separate situation. As you saw, we have some very high numbers. We every year seem to be breaking new records for volumes. And I'll point out it's largely the same number of staff that have to keep finding ways to deal with new records. I think some of the issues that you're going to see with regard to some of these development applications around variances. So people they either won't bother applying and they'll just construct their shed or their fence, and it is what it is. We're already not on it. So this will formalize not being on it.
Director Acton?
I'm curious if there's going to also be any kind of, not a review, but a report back of, we do hear, oh, there's only 4.5 staff or 6 staff, and we used to have this many back then, or, which is fine, but it has no relative for us. Doesn't say, well, is this really a workload for 12 people? Is there a way to compare it to, I know it's hard, apples and oranges, but what is somebody else, another land use service department, what does their staffing look like with the same amount of volume that we have?
Mr. Blackwell.
Thank you. Perhaps I can take this one. It's a little bit difficult to compare. I can't give you the precise number now because I can't recall, but I was looking at Islands Trust. Islands Trust, I mean, I think we're all fairly familiar with what they look like. They have in the order of 22 planners. We have right now two full-time development planners and a half-timer that shows up when she can. So that said, the issues that the Islands Trust planners deal with are perhaps different. It's hard to compare. It depends on what kind of development permit obligations people have in a given area. For instance, we have a whole realm of development permit applications in association with single-family residential construction. If we got rid of those and found a way to put those obligations elsewhere, for instance, in, let's say, for argument's sake, in the building bylaw, we could affect close to, if not exactly the same outcomes without going through a whole process. But we don't have staff time to undertake that kind of exercise. We can't even keep up with the applications that come in the door, let alone, you know, improve efficiencies beyond our existing processes.
Director Atton, follow up.
Well, I guess this just brings me back to the thought of this is our first electoral area services meeting, and we have new people, and myself, I'm fairly new. Has there been any discussion on electoral areas and perhaps having proper strategic planning and workshop around where we are now and where we want to go, and so that we can start chipping away at those kind of things, so that we're not one-offs? And
Through Madam Chair, I'm going to have a conversation with you when I do my check-in with you next week during the board meeting with respect to the board's desires around strategic planning, so we can have that conversation next week. Well, it starts with the board, and so we'll get some direction from the board with respect to overall regional strategic planning, and then we can break it down to the electoral area level as well. So I'm assuming we'll have that collective discussion.
Director Smith.
I'm not very comfortable with moving 35 projects ahead, even though there's small projects out there that also need to be. Is it possible to have one staff streamline and just work on the small projects, and then we are not perceived as moving ahead with the larger projects, that we're also keeping the smaller projects and variances on board at the same time? Just dedicate one staff for that particular area?
Mr. Blackwell.
Thank you. To be clear, it's not 35, it's all of them. And so the answer is that would make no difference. That's effectively what we're doing now. So using first in the queue for two planners is basically the same thing. Whether it's one person doing all the small ones and one doing all the larger ones, it's the same flow. So we simply don't have enough staff. We don't nearly have enough staff. And so the only way is to say either we maintain the status quo and the shed variance gets the same time and effort as the new commercial development or the new industrial project or a new brewery or a new distillery, which are, in my world, are really important, but that's why we brought it here. We come to you to tell you that we are in a very serious crisis situation. We can't maintain our service level at an appropriate rate. This is the only thing left to us that we can possibly conceive of, and we look to your direction on how you want to proceed. Status quo, or give preference to those that have more regional significance, let's say.
Mr. Crothers, are hiring planners high on the HR priority list?
They all are. I mean, we prioritize, regularly we prioritize our recruitment efforts, and I believe we have planning staff that are sitting next in queue for recruitment. And we have a whole other operation to operate recreation facilities that are down staff. So it's just as Mr. Blackwell and his staff are experiencing that crunch in planning, we experience that same crunch in HR, and we try to find that balance between satisfying those needs. So it's not a matter of us not being able to recruit. We don't have the positions, and when they come vacant, we make it a priority to get those filled in land use services.
Yeah, in the 4 years I've been here, it's been a crunch in planning the whole time. You've always been down at least 1-2 staff. Mr. Wilson, Director Wilson.
I appreciate, there is a big staff problem there. Is it not possible to use contract staff or temporary staff? I think you've already got some of those, but is it not possible to bring those in on a temporary basis to get over the hump?
Mr. Blackwell.
Thank you, through you to Director Wilson. That's an option, one that we've pursued. It's really not a very good option, and the reasons are that it's a stepping. First of all, it's difficult to attract solid planners that are probably gainfully employed, which is why they're solid planners, or they're solid planners and therefore they're gainfully employed for a 1-year term. We've done that with a number of positions. We find that it's hard to recruit and staff don't stay. So that exacerbates this revolving door. I would say that even if we are fully staffed, that's at an old standard, that's at an old yesteryear level. We don't have, even fully staffed, we can't keep up. We are seeing numbers of applications across the board that far exceed our ability to deliver. We've not modernized. And so, ultimately the board's gonna have to figure out what it wants to do with that. Either say, that's fine, if it takes you 10 months to get a variance, so be it. Or, that's an unacceptable service level, and what do we have to do to adjust that to X number of months or weeks or whatever?
Mr. Carruthers.
Yeah, if I can just add to the issue around staffing, and we've had a fair turnover, and the chair alluded to a couple of the reasons earlier, but Mr. Blackwell referenced staff getting burned out. This is an incredibly high pace, and so staff come in and they work with us, and it's just never ending. It's just this pace, and so when something comes up somewhere else with a little bit more conventional pace, people are looking further. Like you will literally burn your staff out. You can only go so long, just cranking things through until we get to a place where we have a reasonable workload where people feel like they're accomplishing something. That's a contributing factor to our turnover, and it's a vicious cycle. And so we've believe me, I spent a lot of time chatting with Mr. Blackwell about how to resolve these issues in terms of recruitment, in terms of different ways of approaching it, and we're in a position right now where there's not a lot of people walking around the streets of North Cowichan and the South Vancouver Island that are planners just looking for a year's worth of work. I mean, there are some, and there are some that it's a great opportunity, fits with their current situation and ours, but it's not like we just go out in the street and grab somebody to take that on. It's challenging, and because we have such a complex array of regulations, development permit areas, you get somebody new and it takes a long time to get them up to speed. They're having to look through bylaws, and it gets second nature after a while, and the work becomes more efficient. But when somebody new comes on, there's a fairly steep learning curve in the CBRD with regard to managing these applications.
Director Salmon.
So I assume you've probably done this, but are there other sort of creative options? Like, does every minor variance actually have to come to the board, or could it be streamlined another way? Or does does the APC have to be involved every time? Does there have to be a public hearing all this sort of, I assume you've thought about it, but.
Opening the door a crack there.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, through you to Director Salmon. Those are really good ideas. We've already looked at all of those things. So I'm sure, I can't remember, Mr. Badstow might recall, when we were last before this committee making a recommendation that an additional batch of development permit applications be delegated to the general manager. At the end of the day, those reports still have to be written. It just saves a little bit of admin time getting them here. We've done all we can. I would suggest, and I know this is heresy, but I'll say it anyway. When I think about how the world works elsewhere, when I think about how best to support the community and so forth, I think to myself, why do we have so many APCs? We can't support them. There's never a staff person there to provide, like in a municipality. Like you think about the number of applications, let's say the city of Vancouver gets, they have one APC to deal with it. So staff are not in a position of even supporting the advisory planning commissions, let alone whether or not we refer something to them. So I know I wish I could say there was something left for us to look at, but as I said earlier, this really awkward scenario that we're coming to you with is a Hail Mary pass. There's nothing left.
Director Smith?
Is the fee structure enough to support additional staff from developments? The fee structures that are collected, can they support additional staff, or would it be the taxpayers that would be responsible for paying the additional staff?
Go ahead.
Thank you. Through you to Director Smith. That's the optimal, the user pay formula. It's, Mr. Tippett and I have had those conversations. In fact, I think all three of us have had those conversations about the value of reinvestigating whether or not those fees need to change. There is a requirement, an obligation to ensure that your fees are set at a level that accurately or reasonably reflects the cost to process them. If the cost to process them is $2,000, you can't charge 10 because you want to generate a little bit of income. So ideally, it's a cost recovery situation. I feel fairly confident in saying that we're not there anymore, that the fees that were set once upon a time might have covered that off, but they probably don't. So it would be good for us to do a review of that and see what changes need to be made around our fee structure. No one has time to do that.
Follow-up.
If you're not able to do that type of a study, then it falls to the taxpayers, which they're not the ones that are standing asking for applications. The majority of them are at home having to earn a wage to pay for additional taxation. So we need to take the time to find a way to do a study to increase our fee structure.
Thank you, through you to Director Smith. You're right. It's a chicken and egg. The fact of the matter is we don't have staff time. It's either we stop doing applications and do a study, or we keep the application flow growing, keep the Satlam local area plan going, et cetera, et cetera. I would suggest that the difference between where the fees are now and where they would be if it was a full cost capture is not that, the offset is not that great. I can't tell you, and it's not across all types of applications. And some applications, the fee structure is set, and the applications are simple, and they proceed much more quickly than some of the other ones. And so those ones that are done more quickly because of their simplicity, we make money, let's call it, for argument's sake. Those applications that are much more complex, get charged the same amount, take substantially more time, those applicants get their application dealt with at the courtesy of the taxpayer, so to speak. So there's, it's not apples and oranges, it's apples and oranges, it's not apples to apples. That said, if we had the time, we could look at iterating our application structure and creating a matrix where we can say, here are the criteria associated with a simple application, here's your fee for that. Here are the criteria associated with a complex application, here are the fees for that. It would be nice to do, but we don't have the time to write an RFP, to hire a consultant and manage the consultant to do that work for us. We don't have time to do the work ourselves. It's a 5-alarm fire downstairs right now.
Mr. Crothers.
Yeah, I'm just going to suggest that we're going to have some opportunities through your orientation to get a little bit, maybe get a little deeper into some of this in a little bit more detail, so I don't know that we'll solve it today. I think the intent was to bring this matter forward for the committee and you've all got great ideas and great questions, and you know, maybe with some more deeper diving, we can come up with some creative solutions that incorporate some of these ideas. But again, it simply comes down to resourcing. That's the bottom line.
Okay, so my understanding is that this is a stopgap measure you're proposing, and will you be bringing a report back to ESC next time that shows kind of the criteria for doing this, or the actual plan, or are we just gonna go and do it?
Staff's intent was to immediately operationalize this process, this prioritization process. But if I'm hearing that the committee is uncomfortable with this, we can defer and come back with a more fleshed out plan. Time is kind of the essence. My recommendation, just to give you a sense, I did write a report, but we don't even have time to review it. So it's here in draft form. And one of the things I wanted to commit to was bringing this back in spring 19 with a report about how effective this has been. So I'll just leave that as a suggestion and wait for your direction.
I don't know how the rest of the committee feels. I'm a little bit nervous because I know that there's a few things that I think would have some major implications. So I would prefer some criteria around how this is going to work. You know what I'm thinking about. So maybe next meeting we could do that? Would that be possible? Not something big and fancy and elaborate, but just some sort of, yeah?
Principles in writing is what you want. Yep.
Yeah. Yep. Director Acton.
Well, that said, and it being a crisis, could we also just start implementing it now, and then you would come back with like a one-pager or something?
Sure.
Yep.
Yeah. Does that sound fair? Is that reasonable with people? Director Bonford?
No, this is not speaking to that specifically. I wanted to make this comment a while ago. Is there any value, and this isn't short-term, this isn't right now, but is there any value, because I know that we've certainly done this in the past, is to temporarily put on a rezoning freeze? Would that help anything at all? Thank you.
Thank you. I'd love to put on a full development application freeze for a little while. No, we're required by law to process all applications that come in. Fortunately, with generic, other than subdivision applications that have a prescribed timeline, generic applications, rezoning, OCP amendments, DVPs, DPs, there's no specific obligation in respect of a timeline within which to process those. But there's no legal authority to not accept applications. We must by law. It's as set out in the Local Government Act.
So are you saying you have to, by law, but can you defer them?
Thank you. Through you to Alternate Director Bomford. That's what we're proposing to do with this, is those that have fewer consequences. And I want to be clear. I don't want to leave anyone with the impression that I'm not suggesting for a second that even the minor applications, like a shed variance, is not important to the homeowner. They're all important applications, but we can't properly service and do justice to what is going on the ground by treating all applications exactly the same way. And so that's what this is about.
Well, I know the development permit applications. I was talking specifically about rezoning.
Thank you. Through you to Alternate Director Bomford. So the rezoning applications, DVPs, DPs, et cetera, all of the development applications would be vetted against the criteria that would be established for the purpose of giving priority to a certain class of applications. So sometimes there'll be rezonings. Sometimes, if somebody wants to rezone their property to, let's say, increase the maximum allowable footprint of their house or something, should that get priority over somebody that wants to start a manufacturing facility and wants to rezone accordingly? So sometimes there'll be rezonings, sometimes there'll be variances, sometimes there'll be development permits, et cetera.
Okay, so we actually have a motion on the floor. Could someone read it, please?
So the motion, the direction I heard would be the motion that would roughly sound like this, that staff be directed to develop a process to triage development applications based on urgency.
And report back next EASC.
And report back to the next EASC with the details around the criteria.
Okay, everyone clear on that? Can I call the question? All those in favor? All right. Thank you, Mr. Batstone. That was quite a discussion. And we have one more new business item, but people probably need a break because I apologize, I forgot to do that. We were having so much fun. So why don't we take a quick break? Because I need to. 5 minutes. Okay. Right here, division, I'll just read that. Okay.
And then you call for a motion to move it.
Yep. All right.
What? You heard it here first.
Who is doing NB2?
Sierra Acton.
Oh, well. They get vacuumed up very quickly.
Smarties, Kit Kats. Smarties, Kit Kats and Mars bars.
Deep fried
Kit Kats.
Yeah, that's my favorite.
That'd be Mark's stash. Otherwise you get cranky.
Or we was NB2 first. Okay. NB2 is Sierra.
All right. NB2, Sierra, bylaw enforcement. Director Acton, I mean.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Bylaw, yes, chickens. It has come to my attention that Area B has no chicken bylaw, or you're not allowed to have chickens, and there's other areas where you are allowed. So I was hoping that we could have a moratorium on chickens in Area B until we modernize our bylaws. Chicken enforcement. Don't enforce the chickens.
I have a bit of an issue in my area too, but I think it will be resolved in the harmonization process. Go ahead, Mr.
Thank you,
Blackwell.
through you.
Please just jump in.
Thanks. So I would invite Mr. Conway to speak about this, but certainly this is an example, and if you recall a short time ago, there was a similar question mark around the keeping of bees. You know, these are emergent issues in our community, and in some OCPs, they were not contemplated for whatever reason. The flavor of the day, the decision was not to include those kinds of considerations in the OCP, so and then ultimately zoning bylaws. So there are no provisions for such things. In the modernization process of the OCPs, I would fully expect these matters to come forward and ultimately be debated by the board, and you know, have the board turn your mind to many things, including whether or not beekeeping is appropriate, and if so, where, how, when, etc., as well as any other kind of backyard agrarian activity. again, that's just one of the myriad issues that are new and emergent that we're going to be dealing with through the modernization process. However, there's going to be a gap between then and now, and the question is how to deal with these. As you heard earlier today from Mr. Johnson, it's one thing to consider bylaw enforcement in the context of health and safety matters, and something entirely different when it is something that's not health and safety oriented per se. Now, are chickens health and safety? Depends who you talk to. You know, if one says that chickens attract rats and that's a health and safety issue, well, then it's a health and safety issue. I don't know. But this is something that you're going to have to turn your mind to. Also, turn your mind to the question of, as Mr. Johnson set out, consistency, so that all residents can expect a similar level of service, or in this case, lack thereof, when it comes to the keeping of backyard chickens. I don't know if Mr. Conway wants to provide a more fulsome. Mr. Conway, for those who don't know, manages bylaw enforcement.
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair and Committee. So I do have some comments on this, if you'll indulge me. They're general and more around bylaw, sort of bylaw enforcement and not taking enforcement, and what some of the issues and implications of doing so are. My first point is that not enforcing bylaws can potentially erode public confidence in bylaws. The CVRD, I think, for many years has struggled and continues to struggle with perceptions that it doesn't enforce its bylaws. And as a result, we regularly encounter property owners and members of the public that choose to undertake activities that are in violation of current bylaws. And that takes a fair bit of resource to bring them into compliance. So we're fighting this perception already, and I'm not saying that this particular issue is necessarily going to make that problem worse, but potentially it could, because it sort of may be perceived as another case of where the CVRD is not enforcing its bylaws. The CVRD currently has a complaints-based enforcement policy. So this is a screening process. It's not practical to enforce absolutely every bylaw in every case, because there are probably many enforcement or violations out there that if we went looking for them, we would require an army of bylaw enforcement officers to deal with it. So we have a complaint-based enforcement policy, which is a screening process that helps us to identify issues that are really affecting residents within the region. So if we're not hearing about it, I suppose there's an assumption that it may not be a priority. Once we get a complaint, though, then we do commit under that policy to investigating it, and if there's a violation confirmed, then we'll take action. In the particular case that's related, we have received a complaint, and so we're pursuing that. And if we don't deal with it, that may help to may undermine our larger enforcement program that we have here. It's problematic for the bylaw enforcement officers when we're not taking enforcement, or when we're picking and choosing which bylaws are to be enforced. They try to be as black and white as they possibly can be, being objective, being fair. And when certain bylaws are enforced and certain other ones aren't, it becomes really difficult for the enforcement officers to communicate with the public about what their job is and what they're doing and why they're not taking action under a particular circumstance. So if this committee and the board is going to direct that enforcement action not be taken, I would really sort of request that you consider carefully whether this situation is critical enough that it would sort of warrant not taking enforcement and putting the enforcement officers in that kind of a position. I would also suggest that it puts directors in a bit of a position too, or potentially could, in that when enforcement action is commenced, I would expect that you probably don't want to be in a situation that you're getting phone calls from the person that's violating the bylaw in every case, because this does, it is a potential consequence where you get property owners lobbying their area director to help them with this bylaw enforcement issue that they've got, and you may be finding that you're getting a lot of phone calls asking for some relief on bylaws, and I think a preferred practice would be that the board's role around bylaw enforcement is establishing the bylaws, establishing policies, and letting the staff deal with the enforcement end of it, not getting directly involved in that. That is difficult to do. I appreciate that, because you do deal with the public, and it's hard not to talk to your public, but enforcement is a tricky subject, and it's probably better to be letting professional bylaw enforcement staff deal with that. So I won't continue to go down this this path, but I just wanted to make sure that you're aware of some of the implications of not enforcing bylaws, and to consider it carefully. The preferred practice with these matters is to look at amending the bylaw if you feel that the bylaws are not reflective of what the community expects, or if they're need of some sort of update. The South Cowichan Official Community Plan was reviewed in 2011. It's relatively recent, but the Area B bylaw is out of date, and I think it's expected to be updated with the harmonization and modernization projects. But it's I do appreciate there are some issues with it in its current form. So Area C did go through an amendment to its bylaw a few years ago where it did allow backyard chickens, and there was a provision put into that bylaw that allowed it. A similar amendment wasn't done for Area B or some of the other areas at that time, but that would be another way of dealing with this, is to look at an amendment that could allow backyard chickens and legalize it, so that we're not having to deal with it through enforcement. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. So where do you want to go, Director Acton?
Could we use the Area C amendment to chickens as a guideline for enforcement until we modernize our bylaws regionally?
Yeah, I don't believe we could use it for enforcement. The Area C zoning bylaw is, or the South Cowichan zoning bylaw is specific to areas A and C. So it wouldn't really have any standing if we tried to enforce it, because it doesn't apply to Area B.
So what I'm saying is,
Yes.
Area B, you're not allowed any. So if Area C is what, 4 or 5, 6, I don't know how many.
Something in that range.
Okay, so let's say it's 5. Then we could say, well, we're going to enforce any that are, at this time, we're going to only enforce those who
I
have
see.
more than 5, so that we can keep it under control until we modernize it. Instead of penalizing everyone in Area B, because it's something obvious, even in Vancouver, they have backyard chickens.
Right. Madam Chair, it is conceivable that a policy could be put in place that that would tolerate a number of chickens without enforcement action being taken. I know a similar approach was done for the Nantry Perry Road situation, where it was done through policy. That's an option, but I would just caution that if you're going to do that, to use it very selectively and only in situations that there's a clear justification. There are many situations that this committee is going to encounter where the bylaws may seem like they're not appropriate, or that you may want to look at amending them. And if you do it by policy too much, you're going to find that the bylaw is not. It becomes very confusing to apply it, and it's not applicable to the situation. It's preferable to amend the bylaw itself to deal with that, rather than accumulating a pile of policies that are regulating.
Mr. Blackwell.
Thank you. I'm going to try to help out Director Acton here. So to the extent that I understand that Director Acton wants to help facilitate the provision of backyard chickens, An option could be a resolution that directs staff to modernize the zoning bylaw to include backyard chickens, and that no enforcement action be taken until that process is complete. And I'd ask Mr. Conway if that would respect kind of the intent of what he is suggesting.
Yes, that would give clear direction to enforcement staff. You may find that it may not, there may be some dissatisfaction with some of the residents that may not support that, but that's entirely within the board's prerogative to not enforce its bylaws, so that is a viable option.
Yes, need a motion.
Staff would have to speak to this, but I would also be concerned that if you stop enforcing, and yet the regulations that will come in, because there will be some form of regulation around backyard chickens, it won't be just that people will just do whatever they want to do, and then when it comes time to rein it in through your zoning, you're going to have people that have gone above and beyond, and you're going to have to try and rein those in as well. So there's unintended consequences. I'd be really reluctant to come up with a policy here today. Maybe what staff can do is kind of summarize what Mr. Conway talked about. Mr. Blackwell had a recommendation. It is very challenging. I think, as Mr. Conway said, you're going to come across bylaws that have not kept up with the times and that your public are uncomfortable about. But I think it's a dangerous precedent to start setting policy about not enforcing them. I think it's a dangerous, slippery road to start going down, quite honestly. And I think that the public would understand that there will be an opportunity to review those bylaws and update them at some point in time. But I would not recommend that you take that action. As your administrator, I don't think it's best practice. Mr. Conway's explained the reasons why. But if the committee so chooses, we could come back with a potential solution that maybe the committee could consider. But it's not something that I would recommend.
Mr. Salmon, Director Salmon.
Just I'm wondering, in this particular case where I believe if you look at the history, there's only reason that Shawnigan Area B has a different zoning bylaw than A and C is because of the SIA case a few years ago when the lawyer recommended holding off just for that purpose. So really with the South Catch and OCP, A, B, and C should all have the 3510, I believe it is the zoning bylaw. So I think from that point of view, your suggestion might make sense to apply, just assume that same chicken provision was intended to apply in all three areas.
So where do we go? Would you like a motion, to make a motion? Okay.
And I'm trying to consider adding, the unnecessary use of staff time and the fact that we only have 1.5 bylaw officer, so getting them to chase after people with chickens in Area B, I think is not productive. So my motion is to, help me out here, is to consider to modernize the Area B chicken bylaw and
Zoning
hold off
bylaw.
any enforcement until it's brought forward to the committee.
So
at
yeah,
that
maybe
time.
I'll take a run at consolidating that. So that staff be directed to pursue amendment to the Area B zoning bylaw to conform to the South Cowichan zoning bylaw in respect of chickens, and that until that is in place or brought forward, let's say, that no enforcement action will be taken. Is that where you wanted to go? Okay.
Do I have a seconder? Director Salmon, any discussion? Call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. All right, so now we have, where are we? Question period. Welcome, Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On this question of chickens, from from my knowledge is Area B has zones that allow chickens. So what zone are you talking about that doesn't allow them? It must be the village containment area, is it not? We have chickens all over Area B. For someone to make a statement and say that there's no chickens allowed in Area B, that's crazy, because they are. And if you're going to talk about a zoning bylaw for chickens, should you not designate the zone it's going to be in? Because we have the village area, the containment area, which is much different than the rural area B.
Right, well, I suspect it's specific to a residential area, probably in the containment area, R3, perhaps. And I can check with Mr. Blackwell. That's correct. Wow.
Madam Chair, I would like to thank this committee for having a second look at UB1, and I think cooperation and negotiation is always the way to go. We can always make things work. On talking about that, on the harmonization of the OCPs, it's going to really interest me how they're going to harmonize, for instance, the temporary use permits. Because some areas have temporary use permits, some areas don't have them, some have temporary use special events, temporary use permits. How are we going to harmonize all this?
So, Mr. Evans, my understanding is that everything is as it is in all the different areas will be in the harmonized document. And then when we modernize, there'll be some effort to look at those types of policies and see where it should apply more across the electoral areas, or whether it should remain specific to a particular local area plan. I got that right.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. This is going to be very, very interesting.
It will be.
Thank you.
All right, so now I have to ask for a motion that the meeting be closed to the public in accordance with Community Charter Part 4, Division 3, Section 90, subsections as noted in accordance with the agenda items. Thank you, Director Kuhn. Thank you, Director Marcotte. Okay, shall we move into closed? All in favor? There we go. 5 minutes.